Thank you very much. I must admit I sound a lot better on paper than I feel at many times. I'm going to start sharing now with my slides. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to present a talk. The second thing I would like to say is thank you for conducting the meeting in English. I'm afraid, despite being a linguist, my Greek is not very good. So and we all now tend to use American English rather than British English. So we might find some differences there too. Now, the first thing I'd like to point out is that I won't be addressing the climate crisis directly. As mentioned, I am effectively a lawyer and a scientist, and to some extent, I will be providing an overview of what space does for us and how it has actually impacted us and what possible solutions it might provide in the future. Now, one of the things I notice with respect to this meeting is as a scientist, I have noticed the Greek contribution to the sciences, particularly in the Western civilization. And my personal favorite is a Greek philosopher known as Pyrrho. The reason I use him as an example is because he had a particular view on fire. Fire was symbolic of energy, and he considered to be both central and transformative. Another reason for using Pyrrho's skepticism and his view on fire as an example is because not only does it descend to the modern sciences through the Greek legacies and philosophers, but it connects us across borders to Central Asia, the Buddhist cultures and the like, as far east as the Pacific. And we must notice that many of these Eastern cultures are now part of the United States culture as well. So we find that the extension and the leaping across borders, the transdisciplinary connections, are very much global and not restricted to any one particular area. Now, one of the first thing we notice about this is that space science, which I recognize descends directly from the work of the Greeks and later on through Kepler and Newton, is what has given us knowledge about climate change. Not just the local conditions relevant to any one particular country, but also to the entire world. Now, one of the things about that is we not only have this planet, but we have other planets we can study in the solar system and outside the current solar system, which also provides us with information about what happens. Now, I will come back to that in a short while, but as I mentioned, I'm a lawyer, and the activities of space science and, in fact, of anything related to space are regulated by international law. And in particular, there is the law of outer space, which is specifically stated in the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. There are four associated treaties with that, which build on specific mentions in the Outer Space Treaty, but I'm going to summarize to some extent the background and which is relevant to the climate crisis and the global situation as we see it, and in particular to the nations which are close to the oceans and which are impacted by atmospheric conditions. Now, above all, in the 1960s, what the Outer Space Treaties did was they emphasized cooperation. And this cooperation was geared towards the use and exploration of space for science and economic activity, but as always in law, subject to certain restrictions. These restrictions are generally related to the fact of sovereignty and appropriation of land or areas in space or celestial bodies. You obviously can't own an entire planet, although some people want to try. There is a history of poor treatment of populations, which the Outer Space Treaty delegations did not wish to see repeated as a result of the world wars and of the colonial imperialism of the past centuries. But there is also the relevance to wars and conflict, in that by the 60s, the dangers of nuclear warfare, contamination of the earth in many ways, as well as the technological demands that we were placing on the earth, were already becoming apparent through the use of physical, chemical, and biological weapons. Now, those are the negative sides, but as I pointed out, cooperation is what is particularly important and will lead to, I hope, more solutions. This cooperation can be seen not just in international law, but in national legislation, particularly cooperation between the space agencies, where, for example, the International Space Station, which keeps a constant watch over us and develops technologies for use on Earth, is readily available as a result of agreements between many countries, even though it is led by the United Nations, United States and NASA. So what does space do, and what does it do for us within the context of the legal environment? Well, space and its technologies is far more extensive than just cyberspace or artificial intelligence. It's far more extensive than just looking at planets and atmospheres. It's far more extensive than just looking at whether power and energy supplies are available readily or not. What it does is it helps us to manage disasters, because we can model processes, not just here on Earth, but on other planets, as an ideal experiment to see what the results would be without actually affecting life on Earth at the moment. What we have got is, when we look at the solar system and the exoplanets and we send astronauts out, we are actually developing not just physical processes, but we're looking at chemical and biological sciences that affect our lives. And in particular, I would like to point out that the space medicine is already contributing a great deal to the health of our citizens on Earth. And of course, we would not know about climate change unless we were looking at geology and the environment from space. On a daily basis, we find not just observation of the environment and the like, but we can actually track where large populations are moving across borders. We can check the demographics and the growth of cities. We have, of course, got ready-made daily solutions such as navigation, the GPS systems, the Galileo systems that are coming into play and the like. We have communications via satellite. So space is not just about going to the moon or a few astronauts living out there. It is something that crosses borders and provides us with solutions, but of course also has indicated what problems we are causing on Earth. So, a large topic. Should we restrict ourselves to this particular Earth in that case? Should we gear our solutions only to this Earth? Should we use the money that we're using for space exploration or space sciences? Should we redirect those to the solutions that are needed on Earth and ignore space altogether? Well, given that modern science underlies these outer space treaties, the notion of cooperation, the idea of free exchange of data, which is part of the space treaty, means that every country, whether it is Greece or whether it is the United Nations, United States, or whether it is an island in the Pacific, can get the raw data and use that to help themselves, as well as work with other people to help other folk, and to provide solutions on a global level, but also at a local and very domestic level, which can be sustained through national legislation as well, and any activities which might support the development of these activities. Now, as I said, I'm going to be talking about a large area, and in particular, I'd like to point out one of the primary uses for space and astronauts living in space is that any habitat or technology for use in space would need to be self-contained and needs to be sustainable. We cannot keep sending rockets out there in order to give them batteries or pizzas or whatever. Food needs to be grown there, water needs to be recycled, air needs to be recycled. The air that we breathe on Earth is freely available, but it is not freely available in space. So we need to work out whether those technologies are useful on Earth or not. But what we also need to recognize is that anything we do at a local basis affects everybody else on Earth. There are no borders or boundaries except in our legal documents. When we cross a border, whether it's for immigration or economic reasons, it is something that we have put in place, but the air and the water does not recognize it. So many solutions have been proposed which look at terraforming other planets. Terraforming is a general term which on Earth we tend to call geoengineering because we think it's restricted to Earth. And this is an indication of some of the ways in which we might look at the solutions that are coming through. Hopefully, this takes away some of the dryness and the seriousness of the topic that we're discussing. Down to the left is a model of the Earth in the museum in Berlin. Space Station 76 is essentially a way of recognizing that we have space habitats which are not necessarily based on planetary bodies or the like. We have, of course, the possibility of terraforming planets like Mars or elsewhere if we can get to them. But I note that the important part here is not that we need to get to them, but that the solutions we come up with for terraforming other planets are applicable to Earth as well. And in that sense, terraforming Mars, which I refer to here, is actually a board game which people might want to play at some stage to see whether the ideas they come up with and the solutions that people play with might be a useful way of looking at what we need to do. So, straightforwardly, I'm suggesting that space technology can provide a solution. However, there is a problem with that, as with all solutions. Solutions work really well when they are at a local, small level. We can put in a small power plant to power a small village, but then we need to actually scale it up to power a city or an entire country. This is the problem that we have now. Things on an industrial scale affect the Earth far more than anything on a local domestic scale. We can, of course, look at old technologies. We may reinvigorate or renew them, or we may look at solutions which combine old and new technologies. We can, of course, transform the old into the new, as we have done, and you will see in a minute that I have taken Greek philosophy and applied it to our modern situations, attempting to transform the old into the new to make it applicable in all sorts of situations. I would like to also apologize for some of my academic language because these have specific meanings, technical meanings. I do not have time to go into those, but I'll be happy to explain these or discuss these during the Q&A session or in person via email or the like. So when we take choices, I have used Planet B an example of what will happen when we find a solution. But what I'd like to point out is that whatever solutions we have found so far on Earth, the Industrial Revolution in particular, all the technology of the last 200 to 400 years or more, has not necessarily been good for us. We are interfering with life on Earth, not just human life, but other life. An example of this, which we are extending into space, is Elon Musk has thrown a contaminated, bacteria-ridden Tesla car into space. So not only have we started contaminating Earth, affecting Earth, but we are affecting outer space already because of the way that various people are using solutions without any control, management, or consideration for the impact that these have. Solutions often rely on a particular Western concept of the noble savage, i.e. the indigenous, the primitive person lives in harmony with nature. But do they really? Is this just nostalgia? Are we willing to give up? In order to live with that sort of nostalgia, are we willing to give up our current technologies, our telephones, our cars, our various things that keep us warm in winter, the energy solutions that we discussed a short while ago? So at some stage, what we need to do is look at how and why the legal situation allows or does not allow us to do this. A large part of the restrictions of the legal environment that we have restricts us in terms of new ideas and often takes us back a few centuries. However, if we go back to the pre-Socratic philosophers, we find that this links us to various populations on Earth, but we also find it links us to modern solutions possible through modern science. Now, this is a very complex slide. I'm not going to go through it in detail. I'm very happy to discuss it later, but I would like to point out that law and regulation tends to be a very important part of our lives, even though we disregard it at any time. Law and regulation is what allows us to live with each other, makes cooperation possible. And cooperation is necessary in order to find solutions for the global Earth. When we go into space, and even on Earth, we have old people, we have people with disabilities, we have all sorts of issues. Infants cannot look after themselves. And what we need to find is a way of ensuring that the people who are suffering, whether they're in the Sudan or whether they're in Greece or whether they're in Iceland, that they have the basics required for survival, but not just survival, but a good quality of life. And the reason this slide is up here is because if these essentials are not available in space, then people live only 3 minutes or 7 days or the like. Whereas on Earth, of course, we can survive somewhat longer, but that's because we have help with other people. So what I suggest we do is we actually embrace the Anthropocene. We embrace the fact that technological change is here, that we use the solutions that we have, but we don't necessarily use the solutions that have led us to the problems. What we need to do is look at ways of ensuring that not just humanity, but Earth survives, not just through a climate crisis, but through almost any activity that we have in the future, because as I say here, the future is already here. And in that sense, there are many, many things going back to, again, the original notion of Greek democracy and human rights, way back to 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, and recognizing that there are directions that we need to choose, which are not easy. The decisions are not easy for us, but we do need to look at them, and we need to make sure that these solutions work rather than making us and other life on Earth go extinct. So that is my current position, and I'm happy to take any questions and answers if we have time now or in the discussion later.